Hello and welcome back everybody to the Global Flow series. I am so excited to have Laurie Dupar here with us today. And thank you so much for your time and joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm excited.
Yay. Okay, so I'm going to read Laurie's official bio because you need to know why this amazing woman is joining us today and why you need to listen up. So Laurie Dupar, Senior Certified ADHD Coach, Certified Mentor Coach, and trained psychiatric nurse practitioner, specializes in working with clients of all ages who have been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD and want to fully understand how their brain works, minimize their challenges, and get things done. We're all about this on the summit. In 2015, she founded the International ADHD Coach Training Center, where she trains and mentors emerging ADHD coaches to help them build successful and profitable coaching businesses they love. Laurie is the co-author and editor of the #1 best-selling Amazon series, the ADHD Awareness Book Project, including A Wacky Ways to Succeed with ADHD, and the author of the popular book Brain Surfing, and 31 other awesome qualities of ADHD. In addition to her private coaching, she's a fierce advocate for persons with ADHD, sitting on several organization boards. Oh my goodness, this is fascinating. I'm like, right? And I think a lot of people potentially have ADHD and don't even know they've got it. So
70% of 80% of people don't know they have it.
Oh,
mm-hmm.
Okay.
1 in 10 do,
okay.
And 80% don't know they do.
Oh, and man.
Entrepreneurs are 300% more likely to have ADHD.
Whoa. Okay. I'm just writing those stats down. That's crazy. 1 in 10 have it. 80% don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, crikey. Okay. I take a lot of notes, so I'm sorry if I don't look at you because I'm scribbling away. I'm taking a lot of notes.
Yeah. It feels very important that you're taking notes.
Okay, good. So before we get into this conversation, I'm asking everybody, what does flow mean to you?
Gosh, and I mentioned this to you really quick right before we started, because I was thinking, it's always an interesting thing when obviously people are doing wonderful things in the world, and I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about. What is flow? And so I researched it. I'm a big fan of Google. And I said, oh, okay, that. So I understand flow to mean sort of this, and also I live in Seattle, which is sort of Google and Amazon headquarters, and they're all about flow and Microsoft, right? Getting things, it seems to me it's sort of that state, that mental state, that productive state where you get a lot of things done is kind of what flow is. And it's almost like people are, they're trying to get into that particular place where, and it's not just getting things done, but it's doing it with ease. Is what happens. And what I was reading about, right, Joanna was reading about flow, and I remembered when I was, maybe 18 or so, and I was a waitress before I went off to college. And I remember when I was, in the middle of my shift, just being in that, we called it the zone then, but it was a flow. And I remember my arms doing a certain thing, my legs doing a certain thing, and my mind it was just like you were in this sort of dance. So that's what I really think of in flow. It's not just that you're getting a lot of stuff done. It's doing it with an ease and a grace, almost to the point where you're not even aware of time passing. I think is a real important part of it.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, I used to waitress, and I prided myself on being the best one ever. And I actually loved it because I just realized when you said that I was in flow. And that's probably why I loved it so much, because my brain was in another dimension. And I actually then used to go, if I didn't wind down after that and come out of that state, I used to waitress all night in my dreams. I was the best waitress all night. Everyone was getting served.
You were the best waitress. You were doing it 24/7.
And I'd wake up and I'm like, I am whacked because I hadn't. So I used to learn I had to have a buffer when I stopped that to going to sleep. But I love
that's what flow is to me.
Beautiful. Can you tell us a bit about how you are doing what you do now? Obviously, you're training people in this work. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you got here.
I think a lot of it was spent in flow now that I look back.
I love it. I love it.
Because there's a couple other aspects of flow I honestly think are important, is that it's not, I mean, when I was waitressing, it was that it was a very familiar, like I said, almost dance choreograph thing when you did that, how you were meeting the needs of people. And I recognized that also in many other things that I did. And there's an aspect, I think, of flow that is important to my story anyway, and a lot of the things that I've accomplished, is that there has to be a really strong interest or passion involved with that. Otherwise, it's not, it's clunky, it's uncomfortable, you are unenergized, and productivity is not going to happen. You're not going to get stuff done. I have people ask me this a lot. How do you do so many things, Laurie? You have an active coaching business, you're writing books, you're hosting telesummits, you're all sorts of things. And I think part of it is that I am able to access that flow state. We, with ADHD, just call it hyperfocus. And are able to really get a lot of stuff done. And it has to do with really being interested in what you're doing, being passionate about it, being creative about it. And I'm trying to think how I got to my story. I could never have planned it. It just sort of came. It was a following. I suppose that's part of the flow. It was truly just following that next piece in front of me that was about what I was passionate about, what was consistent with my core values. And that just like pulled me along. And when it came, I was lucky enough to also be able to do a lot of things at one time, and also have people around me that were really helpful to get things done and encouraging.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take a step back. Do you mind me asking, I don't know, do you have ADHD?
I was just recently diagnosed. Everybody that's known me said, really, Laurie, is there any doubt? I guess when you are really productive like that, they just think you got to be ADD. But a lot of women are diagnosed when they're my age. Hormonal shifts will play with the way your brain is, your neurotransmitters are balanced in your brain. So it's very common that women going, sort of in their midlife, may start to struggle more with certain symptoms than they did before. And for me, it was just sort of this disorganization that was happening, very uncharacteristic for me, forgetting things, which wasn't characteristic either.
Okay. So how, I guess first up, so we're not just going to talk about that today, because you also are an expert in helping entrepreneurs manage their brain style.
Right.
Now knowing those statistics, and the 80% don't know they have it, entrepreneurs are 300% more likely. How would I even start to suggest, because I've been in times, and I've been in spin, I've been overwhelmed, I've been in fear, I've not done anything, and then I've got times and I'm like the most productive person ever, and I'm learning to balance out those parts. But how the heck does somebody know if they've got it?
We've gone, it's what I call a tipping point, right? Where a lot of times those same talents are going to get you really far. Honestly, there's a lot of creativity in that. There's a lot of movement in that. When somebody typically goes from, wow, okay, this was really kind of working for me here, till something's not working for me. That's when things aren't working for you anymore, is typically when most people are going, okay, I'm not as productive as I was. It's affecting my work. It's affecting relationships. It's affecting something else, is usually what people start to notice, whereas before it wasn't. So the procrastination may start to have more consequences to it. The disorganization has you missing a deadline for something that's really important. Otherwise you would have remembered.
Okay. Yeah. And it's almost like when it gets to that, those extreme points, it's like, it's just not funny anymore.
No, exactly. It's not funny anymore. And different people experience that at different times, where they they've been managing and compensating for some of the challenges they've been having, in fact, and using some of the strengths that they have. And then what happens is it tips, and they're like, okay, this isn't funny anymore. Most people will say they're working way too hard for the same thing. It's taking them quite a bit more time to do the same thing. They're usually exhausted. They have no energy. They're not sleeping. They're stressed. They're overwhelmed. It's pretty typical.
I'm like,
check.
not like, I think I don't know if it's something you can come out of or change, but I've definitely had periods of that in my business, more so than any other time in my life. Are there any other like character traits or personality traits that would...
Not necessarily personality. I think what's interesting and why so many people haven't been diagnosed, even though they have ADHD, is because each person's very different. There's a few core symptoms. People will typically notice that they're much more distracted. So it may be simply that distractibility is now interfering with things they want to get done. They may have seen that as creativity in the past, but now they're walking out their office door and they have a purpose to do, and all of a sudden they figure out they're, folding laundry, and they totally forgot that they were going out to mail the letter to someone. So really a lot of distraction, a lot of impulsivity, sometimes not thinking before or stopping and before you're doing something. Sometimes that comes out verbally as well as physically.
Yeah.
Hyperactivity, which some people think goes away when you're in adolescence. We used to think that ADHD was something we outgrew, but now what we recognize is that it shifts how it exhibits itself. So that hyperactivity tends to become then more mental. So people start to experience a lot of anxiety, a lot of just racing thoughts, and also verbal hyperactivity. People will notice as well. They just talk a lot.
Sorry. I'm betting.
And they tend to be, and by the way, also tend to be incredibly bright and creative. So you say it.
Describe me. I'm like, I talk too much. I can be very hyperactive. And if the number of tabs generally open on my laptop are any, indication of how distracted I can get. I have just deleted the emails from my phone, though. I'm very proud of myself for that.
Wow, good.
That's
like accomplishment,
right? I was like,
yes,
and it's because I didn't trust myself to not go to it 1,000 times a day. So I was like, at least when I'm not at my desk, I'm not on email, and that's just fine. So I am learning. So there's probably, I'm guessing, 80% of the people watching this going, oh crap, I think I might have this, right? And obviously we're all, I believe almost everybody on this is very heart-centered, wants to make a difference, is trying to get their business or their thing off the ground or start living their life purpose, and all of this stuff comes up. How do you go from that place of missing deadlines and you've hit this tipping point and you're like, how do you transition out of that into being somebody who gets stuff done and becomes more productive?
So I really think, and it actually has a lot to do with going back actually to the flow, because one of the things that I think is true about the flow is that each person, when I was reading about it, was like there was this formula. And I'm thinking, I've been working with flow for a long time. In fact, one of the experts that I recognized that talks a lot about flow is actually Ned Hollowell, who is an ADHD expert. I didn't realize that was one of the topics he was talking about, but I know Ned very well, and he definitely comes from the same perspective I do, is that it's not all bad. So you may experience some of that, the chaos or the overwhelm. And also you can, if you are aware of yourself, where those challenges are, but also where what you do really well, you can refocus that into this flow state. So you were mentioning something about, part of it is just being aware. There are definitely checklists and symptom checklists on the internet you can just go to and see, do I fit all of these? Different places in the world have different types of services for people to be diagnosed and treated for ADHD. For a lot of people, once they understand, oh, this is what's going on, they recognize, okay, the reason I'm getting distracted is because I have all my tabs open or my emails open. If I just close them out, that makes it better. So people who, so sometimes just the awareness that, oh, wow, this is what distracts me, or this is what overwhelms me, or I'm with flow, for instance, because of the intensity of being in that, even though you may not feel it in the moment, there tends to be a lot of energy put into that, a lot of mental energy, and I think physical energy. And a lot of people won't give themselves a break between having that productivity, sort of a recharge time, and then starting up again. So I think a lot of times it's just the awareness of saying, wow, okay, this is how my brain works. This is how I get into flow. This is how I get, no different than this is how I get distracted, or this is how I get off topic, or when I have too many projects, it's overwhelming and it's not, now I know I just need to chunk them down and look at them in separate pieces, not the big picture.
So
does that help?
Yeah, totally. So you talked about different entrepreneurial brain styles. So if somebody's like, uh-oh, what if I'm this? And that's definitely not the reason I have here. It's for anyone to start panicking and self-diagnosing and hitting up Google. But really to understand ourselves better, and maybe a couple of people will have that aha. But if you have, what are some of the other styles that we might recognize? Are there other types of people who maybe go into that place occasionally, but it's not necessarily?
Absolutely. The reason that I wrote the entrepreneurial brain style book was my own experience. I went through, it was, I was ramping up my business about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was mentoring with someone, and there were a group of about 100 of us who were emerging entrepreneurs. And I would notice as we went through this, and this was a whole year-long program with 100 people, so it was like this little lab situation for me and my scientific brain, right? A lot of people didn't want to admit they had ADHD. I did a lot of coaching in the corner for folks because that was kind of scary for them to say. But what I started to notice over the course of the year was that these are amazing people. They have high energy. They have great ideas. They obviously want this as passionately as I want what I'm building in my business, but they were not getting it done. They were not able to be productive. So I started to pay attention to the people that were actually, and this particular program had a lot of requirements. So there's a lot of opportunity to be productive. And I just did it because I thought that's what everybody else, I thought everybody else went home after the weekends and just did the same thing I did and knocked it out. Realized after a year that wasn't happening. So I started to become curious as to what was happening with that and why some people were able to follow through and create that business, and some people weren't. So that's where I started to look at the entrepreneurial brain style. Actually, what I noticed was that, and by that time I'd probably worked with people with ADHD for about 10, 12 years, started to notice a lot of similarities in what derailed a lot of the clients I was working with, also seemed to be derailing a lot of these entrepreneurs. And there were things like being able to stay focused on something or not getting distracted. And also not being able to tap into, actually, we call it hyperfocus, but to that flow state and to be able to take advantage of what they actually do well versus focus versus being worried or concerned with some of the things that didn't work. They weren't delegating those things. They were focusing on them and not allowing themselves to then be in this hyper-focused state on something that was really interesting to them. They were there was a lot of disorganization there, maybe not ability to plan some of these steps out. So when we're talking about an entrepreneurial brain style, there are certain qualities that entrepreneurs tend to have that are really helpful. Creativity is one of them. A lot of us build our business on creativity. We tend to be great problem solvers. We tend to be really great risk takers, even though that was sort of a new one for me. I thought, well, I'm not a risk taker. And then I started to think about how many times I started something when who knew how it was going to turn out. We also tend to be quite optimistic because I never really thought that things weren't working. I just thought there was a better way to do it, right? Some of the big challenges that people were having that would stop them from being able to be as productive or to create that business or follow through. Like I said, this large group of individuals, I saw just so many people fall off, and it was very sad because I knew they wanted their business really badly. But the things that would typically derail them were first that they weren't aware of what they did really well. So they were sort of wasting that talent, honestly. And the other was that they weren't able to notice what it is they didn't do well and be able to put a structure in place in order to minimize that. They may never be the best planners or best organizers, but when they focused so much on it, it just drained all their energy. They never got into that flow state with what they wanted to create, and they therefore weren't able to follow through. I also think that there is people who are entrepreneurs, and ADHD is like this, but have a lot of ideas, and the temptation is to go down and try out all those ideas. They're there for a reason, and they're sometimes really amazing. One of the things that I noticed that was a difference between entrepreneurs that succeeded, meaning they were able to focus and create that not only a sustainable and profitable business, were those that were very clear about what the goal was. Very, very clear about what they wanted. And I actually came up with a name for this. I call it your disco ball. And that it ages me a little bit because a lot of us will talk about all the little bright, shiny objects, right? That tends to be something that's a metaphor that we have for all those ideas. Well, it occurred to me what I did differently was that, and the people that I noticed were also able to be successful in this, is that they had something even bigger and shinier. And what's bigger and shinier than a disco ball, right? So that was bigger than all those things. So for them, and it has to do with the flow as well, because flow, this is part of how people get into flow, being very clear about what it is they want to accomplish. If they knew what their disco ball was, anytime they started to maybe be distracted by some of these shiny objects, which given that metaphor were much less shiny than that big disco ball, they had sort of a litmus test. They could say, does this meet that criteria? And they had a way to be able to get rid of some of the distractions or some of the things that would otherwise get them off track, which tended to then interfere with their ability to move forward and be productive.
Yeah, I love the disco ball analogy.
The disco ball, I know.
Love that. Like, I definitely have attended a few disco ball.
I also saw a lot of people who, even though we were fortunate enough to have an amazing mentor who was showing us a lot of different ways to do things, part of the work that I do with individuals is no one's more creative and unique than someone with ADHD. So what I recognized was that not everybody fits sort of the rules that are out there. So being aware of how you work or what works for you, I think is really important. For instance, some of the suggestions I saw, like for flow, was that there's something like people work in 57-minute increments or something. And it's not always true. Some people, when they get in that flow state, is a 4-hour, 6-hour, 8-hour chunk of time. And for them, trying to do in 1-hour increments just wouldn't work for them. It would be difficult for them to stop and start and stop and start. So we oftentimes can try and do what somebody else does and not necessarily stop long enough to go, what really works for me? Am I someone who's a sprinter like that? That's kind of a sprinter thing where you go and then you stop and go and stop. Or am I a marathon runner? And I know for me to be really, to get in that flow, it's very difficult to get out and to restart something else. So I don't want to do that. So I do things in huge chunks of time. I'm more of a marathon person. So I think it's important that people know, are you a sprinter or marathoner?
Yeah.
Also the time of day, I think we can be really judgmental about ourselves for that. And not everybody's a morning person.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this is just being aware of what works for you and applying it to the best benefit that you can.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Like, and I've had those, like, I once had my first one of my first experiences with like real flow was like a 9-hour spell, and I didn't breathe. I barely breathed. I didn't eat. I didn't want to pee just in case it stopped. I was like, this is amazing. It's like, don't leave.
Yeah.
And I wrote an entire program once in a week.
Oh yeah.
Like I just was like, but it was, I had a clear goal, right?
Right.
Everything
you did.
else was shut down, and that was my disco ball for the weekend.
Yes.
I was like, it's 1 a.m. on a Saturday night and I'm creating this, like, but I wouldn't have been anywhere else in the world either. Like I was,
yeah,
I was really, it was beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. You had your disco ball, you were totally focused there. And so the distractions, which everybody's going to have, they were, they didn't have a chance because you knew where you were going with that. And you did it in a long, you're like a marathoner when you're doing your flow thing. And yeah, it helps to have a big bladder because you don't.
I actually have a tiny bladder, which is a bit of a problem.
Oh, no.
Anyway,
but you're right. I guess, you're in the flow when your mouth is dry because you haven't drank anything.
I know, right?
Really badly, yeah. Oh, that's flow.
Not a lot of things make me want to skip a meal. So
I'm with you. You're right. If I skipped a meal, we're in danger. Yes.
Right? I'm like, something must be serious. Either I'm really sick or I'm in flow.
Yeah. And by the way, a lot of people in flow are like that. They do not, and I don't know how they do it. I'm in awe because they skip meals. I'm like, you know what? I could tell you the number of meals I've ever skipped in my life. But when I have, totally flow. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. There's another sign. So when we know if we're in flow or if we're skipping meals.
Yes. Yeah. We'll have to add that on the checklist. Are you in flow? Have you eaten or gone to the bathroom recently?
Right. So funny. And now I'm like, when was the last time I skipped a meal? I don't know. Okay. Sorry. I'm like laughing, but I need to focus. Okay. So how the heck? So I'm one of those people, and one person I love, Marie Forleo, she calls it multi-passionate entrepreneur, and we've got all these ideas coming at us, and I'm the same. Like I'm like, oh wow, we should do this, and I'm like, a couple of friends were like, oh, that's amazing, and then we're like, if we don't do it, somebody else is gonna come up with this, and then it's like, oh, but it's, and then I get emails all the time. Do you want to help with this? Do you want to do that? And I'm like, how do people identify what their disco ball is? Like, how does one person know what the thing is, and then other people are like all over the place?
Okay. Because I honestly think it goes back to, I don't know if it's a mission that we have, but I do think there's something that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, because you are going to have so many ideas, there's going to be so many different ways to do it, is you have to be very, very clear what it is that you want to create. What is it that you're doing in this world? And part of that may be core values. I don't think enough of us look at our core values to see that, because that's sort of a blueprint for who we are and what we're meant to do in the world. But I'm very clear about what my mission is, and it's to increase the awareness of ADHD around the world. It doesn't matter if I talk to one person, it doesn't matter if I talk to 1,000 people, that is my mission. So if I'm offered an opportunity or a path or an opportunity or option comes up that meets that criteria, I will do it. If it doesn't, then I will do something else. Okay. That's my disco ball. That's like, when I'm thinking, okay, do I do it? Do I not do it? Does it meet my goal? And I'm very clear about what that is. And if it does, I'm on it. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, but I guess maybe I depend on flow to get me there, because I do a lot of things. But if it doesn't, I don't have any problem not doing it because it doesn't meet my my ultimate goal. And you have to be very clear about that. And I think sometimes we're not clear about that, and that may be part of it.
Yeah.
And there are definitely times when I go rogue, totally off, but I'm aware, you know, my assistant Meg, she's just crazy. She'll say, you go rogue sometimes. And I said, I know, but I'm doing it totally purposefully because I just want to do it.
Yeah.
And I know it. And I feel as long as I know it, that's good. And but that's okay too, right? We get to make that choice about it.
I suppose if that rogue time, it somehow still feels right. You never know what's going to happen. Like I was just talking to Jackie earlier, and they were like, they felt this strong urge to go to LA for some reason. And the first person her business partner talked to was somebody who was doing a movie on flow, right? Like of all the people, and they weren't even supposed to be at the thing. So,
oh my gosh,
you know, it's like they didn't know why they were going, but they were obviously going for that moment. And so sometimes if it's a strong enough urge, you don't know why you're going rogue.
Yeah.
I'm sure
I think when you asked, you know, the question, how I got here, I could go back and I could actually talk about all the different, what I call breadcrumbs that were there. But I do think that, I could look back and think, wow, or look ahead and now, or backwards and recognize that was such a random thing to do. Why did I do that? And I think people who, you know, if we look at flow maybe in a different level, sort of as I don't know if it'd be universal, but sort of this energy of everybody moving through life together, that those possibilities really do present themselves. And sometimes we may not have any idea why we're doing something. It may be very different than what someone else would have chose for us. And yet there's a knowing in us. And I think that's also that part of flow. Flow is when there's a real clarity. You're very clear about what you're working on. You're very clear. There's not any obstacles. And I think when we're sometimes choosing to take an action that feels right to us, even if it doesn't seem right to anybody else, that is actually part of the flow. It's that universal sort of journey that we're on, that sometimes I think I'm that turtle in, I'm trying to think, Little Nemo, right? You know, when they're all surfing what is that? They're surfing, it's in Australia. They're surfing you know what I'm talking about? Right?
Yeah, there's like a current that they're...
Yeah, the current. Yes, I feel like I'm in the current, right?
I feel like it's a name, but
I know I should know what this is and I don't, but that's what it's like, right? And everybody's cool and they're laid back and they're grooving out here. It's like, yeah, that's the flow to me. It's like, okay, I'm in the right current here. And when we're not, it feels so resisting. It feels so not working. And that's also what happens when we're trying to be productive. And I actually wanted to say this, that I think for people who, if we try and make ourselves productive, I don't think it happens. I think when we want to be in this flow and really take advantage of this energy source that we have, it has to be something that we're interested in. It could be passionate. If we're lucky enough, it's passionate, but it may not be. But it has to be somewhat important and meaningful for us. Otherwise, we're not going to get it done. We're going to put it off. We're going to procrastinate. Something else is going to distract us because it's not important for us. So if it's not, don't do it. Or give it to somebody else to do if it needs to be done, because it's not your flow, but it may be somebody else's flow to get that done. Mm-hmm.
I love that. And I'm going to go and I think I need to watch Finding Nemo again.
Yes, I know.
So I know I think he starts in Sydney Harbour or something. So
he does.
Where I'm based today. So
yeah,
I watched a long time ago, so I'll check out Finding Nemo. I love that people are just trying too hard and they're trying to swim upstream, right? Like it's hard. It's like being caught in a riptide. It's tough.
It is like a riptide. Yes. Yeah. They're just going against the flow. I mean, literally and figuratively, they're going against the flow. And I think that if we just stop long enough and know and know who we are, and take the time to get to know that's that flow place for us. And it stops being resisting. It stops being resistant. It doesn't feel like work. Yeah. And that's oftentimes what I tell people what I do. I thought everybody thought having a business was like creating one. Like that's what I felt I was always doing. I was creating things all over the place. I didn't think that's what I thought they did. I create money, or I create programs, or I create solutions for my clients. Things like that. That's always how I thought about it. And I realized that that's not what everybody else thinks. And it might be because they are trying to do something that they should be doing, not necessarily something that is honest and true for them.
There's so many things here. So I want to just, if you don't mind, go back one step back. And core values and getting clear on your mission is something I have done a lot of work on, and it started with I'm an NLP practitioner, and Tony Robbins is big on his values, and I'd never really thought of it before that, and I was like, oh, I see how this is so important. But for anyone who maybe hasn't been indoctrinated into that world, what are your core values, and then how do you figure out
what they are?
Yeah.
I'm like you. I didn't really know. I thought I knew it was important to me. And then when I did my coach training about 16 years ago, I was introduced to core values, not moralistic values, but really the value, who I am, what my blueprint for who I am in this world. And those are the things that are important to me. And another way to say that is just values. And they're so essential to who I am. They've always been there. And if you look back, they are qualities or situations that have always been important to you. You've noticed them. And if you, and they're not something we choose, which is, I think, an important piece for people to know, because we can be a little bit judgmental about our core values when we start to discover them. Maybe we've discovered that we have a core value around vanity, and we don't really like that we're vain, but we know we really are. We know it's true. But
it's like with shadow values, right?
Yes, yeah, shadow value. But values are not something we choose, and they're also equally weighted. And when we're not living, and they will provide a blueprint for us as to how to be fulfilled and satisfied, and also, I believe, our purpose in this world. Because when we're not honoring them, when we're not including, there's usually about 5 or 10 that I look at when I'm doing work with people. When we're not living those or including those in our life, we're going to feel unbalanced. We're going to feel like we're fighting things. We're going to feel like things aren't working. And yet, and when we take a look at these values and say, how are these showing up in my lives? How am I making sure that these are happening for myself? Everything goes back to that state of calm. And I don't know, have you found that for you when you did your values, that defines, I mean, it is so clear in all my work that it's about my core values.
It's funny, I was actually talking at breakfast to this about somebody who was living true to their values, and how important it was, and we should be doing it more, which is funny this has come up. But and then when I saw it come up, I was like, that's where I need to go, right? Follow the breadcrumbs. It's funny, I've never heard anyone say that we can't choose them. And
you can't.
And that is I'm very grateful that you said that, because it's expanding my mind a little bit, because when I did that work, I wrote down what was important to me, or how I was living. And I guess I was living a set of values, but they weren't necessarily my true ones. Maybe I'm trying to think if I either had changed them, or they were actually what was true, but I just wasn't living them, which might be a slightly different way of looking at it. Does that make sense? So the way I was living was not necessarily true to what I wanted to be my core values, or what really was important. And I suppose that's maybe I was just out of alignment and not living my values, rather than having to change my values.
Yeah, you can't change your values. We're born with them.
Okay.
And no, and a lot of times there's a misunderstanding about what core values are. That they are something that they're moralistic, that there's something that they're right or they're wrong. Like there's good core values or bad core values.
Yes.
And the fact is there's not. And when we understand that we do not choose them, And the reason I say that so firmly is because I have worked for years with families. And and also around families, parents and kids. And gosh darn, it would be much easier if we could choose our values, because we wouldn't be no, seriously.
Yeah, no,
we wouldn't be arguing so much. And one of the characteristics of a value is that we are willing to fight to the end for it. It's where that passion comes from as an entrepreneur, but it can also be what we fight for, or what bothers us so much about someone. And you never see that so clearly as you see it when you're in, working with two people who are biologically related. And also recognize that, wouldn't it be easier if I could just say that's not important to me and get into that? And with a core value, you literally can't. That is what partly defines it. So we don't choose them. And if you look back, and I've done this work with younger kids because my clients range from anywhere from 8 to 88. And it's incredible how an 8-year-old can actually be very clear about what's important to them. And if I'm working with a 15-year-old and doing that work, they look back and we can see this theme in our lives. Core values have always been there. They're the guide for us. They're the blueprint that tells us how to live our life. And we don't choose them because if we did, it'd be much easier. We'd have less problems in the world,
right?
In a way, and in families. We don't inherit them because parents and kids do not line up. If we have a core value that's similar to our family of origin, it's kind of just
luck.
Happen chance. When you consider all the things that we could get from our family, from the family of origin experiences, that we picked up those few things, and the reason that we did is because it was core value for us. And so that's what we remember. That's what sticks in our head.
This is making so much sense. And I suppose that's what, like, relationship, because so often we get into relationships or in our families and we want to just change people. Like, we're like, if you would just see my freaking point of view or know how important this is to me, because this is clearly important to me, but they're like, what? Right?
Yes.
So it's,
yes.
But to know that it's not a choice, and we will, and that's one of the learnings in life, right, is that we can't change anybody. So but even
and it doesn't,
families, it kind of it explains a lot.
Yeah. When we know what they are, though, we can go, oh, okay, I'm reacting this way because this is a core value of mine. And they're not reacting that way because it's not a core value to them. We know they're wrong, but it's okay because I can now separate that. It's not a personal, it's not personal that we see this differently. And then we have a place for discussion about, all right, so how do we maybe blend this, or how do we each give a little bit to make this work for us?
This is like a little part of me is just going, oh, so because I think I was in there trying to change my values, and it's typically
at a certain level, when we're willing to accept that we have core values that we don't really like, then we know we've hit our core values. They don't have to be awful, but typically there's going to be ones that if we really wouldn't want to, tell our grandmother about, so to speak.
Right.
And a lot of people haven't got that deep into their core values. They go from the surface as to maybe what they thought or what they'd like or what somebody told them about them, which is a good place to start. But typically, and if we're trying to do something that's not in line with our core values, we are never going to be in flow, because it's always going to be an unmet value. It's why people are like, okay, I'm going to go to the office. I'm getting all this done. My business is really important to me. And over again, I don't get it. I never get there. And what they're doing is probably more revealing of what their core value, because there's another core value that is coming up that's not getting met. So it's distracting them terribly.
I love this. I think I've had a little personal insight, but can you explain a couple of, like, so some people are like, all right, you've talked about values for the last 20 minutes, but like, what the heck is, like, I mean, for some people it's family or health.
Oh,
what are some of the values you've seen that are maybe the shadowy ones that people don't
Oh,
want to admit? Just for some
like I
personal
said, vanity. I remember working with a young gal who she didn't want to admit that she was vain, but she recognized that that was one of her values. And in fact, it served her really well because she was actually in the fashion industry. If she didn't have that value, it'd be very difficult for her to be good at what she did. I had a gentleman that I worked with that he had a sort of a value around, he called it hedonism. I'm awful, but it was very difficult for him to look at that. And it was really what that meant, though, because he so devoted his life to serving other people. And the fact that there was a value in there that said, take care of yourself and enjoy yourself and experience this, was very difficult for him at first to be able to recognize. But once he realized that that's what was happening and that was there, and he didn't blame it because it's not good or bad, it's just there. It really served him. He was able to see how often, and it didn't mean he's going to go off and do something terrible, but it meant that this was a value that said you need to take care of yourself, was really what it was. You need to take care of yourself and do things for you, not just other people. Part of his soul, basically, was saying you need to take care of yourself because he really wasn't. And that was a value that was difficult for him. For other people, being authentic or taking care of ourselves, they think that's a great value, right? Some people would like to say that they have, I'm a little embarrassed to say I don't have not embarrassed, but it's not one of my top values of health, which for a lot of people that is. And it's not for me. Values can really get in the way of us, like I said, making progress. I was working with a gal who very much wanted to organize her home, and yet she couldn't get rid of anything. And part of the reason, and nobody had asked her, but part of the reason was because she had a core value around the environment. And for some reason in her head, she had got the notion that to be able to clean out her home, she would just be putting all of this stuff in a landfill. And that was so against her core value of the environment. She was willing to literally not be able to walk through her house or use her house because the thought of putting in a landfill was so against her core value that she just couldn't do it. Once she realized that that stuff's recycled, and she was an intelligent woman, she just got stuck in this thought, I think. So vanity might be one. I don't have a core value around health, which I'm very embarrassed about. Trying to think, but I recognize they're not being they're good or bad. Typically, values are going to I have a lot of clients who have a value around respect. And they will do things that you wouldn't believe they would do because of and it's not even necessarily that the respect has to be towards them. It's that they have a core value around just people being respected. And I remember a student I worked with who he had a teacher that was disrespecting another student in the class, maybe making fun of him or something like that. And he talked to people about it and said, this is going on, and nothing was done. So the student, I was working with him because at this point he was failing the class. Actually, and nobody asked him, but he told me he purposely decided to fail the class because that was the only way he could show someone that this teacher was not doing his job. So core values are those things we're willing to fight for. He was literally willing to fail that class to get the attention for somebody that this teacher wasn't being respectful, and it wasn't even towards him. We had a discussion about what were some other ways for him to get his value met. But
yeah, right.
He also put his, the value of going on and getting an education at jeopardy. However, speaks to how powerful these things are, right? Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I love that it's just taking the judgment out of so much of this.
Oh, yes.
I just was hopping off a call with somebody before I got on with you, and it was all about this judgment and beating herself up and not respecting herself, and we go through these we spin and spin and spin, and it's it was coming down to she wasn't, I guess, respecting her core values. It wasn't really a coaching call, but that was what really was going on, and
I think for 15 years, I work with people who have naturally already challenged with being distracted, already a problem with focusing, already a problem with being overwhelmed. And any of these types of things, when we're fighting against, when we know who we are, when we know what our core values are, just in that example, it stops that. And they also have difficulty prioritizing because that's typical of that particular population. But they're not able to, these help with all of those. So anything I can do, and I'm working with my clients to help them get clarity so that those types of things aren't distracting them, is good. And that's a lot of the reason why I do the work around core values for them. It also has, core values also, what we feel guilty about has to do with our core values. When we feel guilty, just ask yourself, what two core values are at odds here? And that's typically what guilt is. We can spend a lot of time feeling guilty, a lot of energy, a lot of distraction. We're never going to get in the flow when we're feeling guilty. And what if it was just that there were two things that were important to us, which are core values, that we're having to decide between at this moment?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. I had to write that down. You'll never be in flow if you feel guilty. Because I've had clients and they feel guilty when they're spending time with, like when they're with their kids, they feel guilty about not working in the business. And when they're taking the time to work in the business, they feel guilty that they're not with their kids. And so there's this conflict and they end up getting nothing done. And
it's incredibly distracting. And you're never going to get in flow with that. And really what's happening is you've got someone who is, and sometimes I like to say the universe has a sense of humor. They'll give us two core values. Typically people have two that are always going to be at odds. And every time we turn around, we are at odds. Typically the description you did with someone who has a core value around family, another core value around making a difference in the world, those are going to get in the way of each other pretty often. As you're trying to maneuver, but knowing that, that's what's going on, and helps us get over that guilt. Choose which one am I going to honor right now, knowing that either one is going to be fine because they're both important. But at least we're at choice at that point. We're not just going through the world with this angst of I'm always doing the wrong thing. Well, if that particular moment you decided that you needed to do that, that talk and miss out on your child's soccer game, then the next time you choose to be at the soccer game versus doing the talk. Everything's balanced with the world.
Yeah. I love that. Right. I know. I was just thinking of like my family and how when I did my values, family wasn't like right at the top of the list. Like I love them, but it wasn't necessarily the top one. And I've had so much guilt over that.
Family, like value shame.
Total value shame over that. But my family's wired differently. Like they can't understand. I'm single and have no kids, and they cannot wrap their heads around that. And so every time I go home, we have this like, why don't you have kids? Why aren't you married yet? Why don't you have kids? And we just have these, and I'm like, you have like, I don't know.
Wouldn't it be easier if you could just choose to have that value?
Right. Like, and part of me thought that before. I'm like, life would be easier if in some ways, if I didn't have this thing inside of me that needs to do this thing and live this mission and do all this other stuff.
Total core value stuff going on there.
Yeah. So it's just fascinating. And we're trying to have these conversations and understand each other and accept that we have these competing core values, because if every time we speak to each other, we have this conversation, it's fun, right? So I'm like, that makes more sense.
Yeah. But everybody's entitled to their own core values. They're not right or wrong. They just are different, because my core values tell me the flow that I'm supposed to be in the world, and theirs are telling them theirs. If we were all the same, we'd all be bottlenecked somewhere up. I don't know. Can you imagine the queue that would be lining up? Like if we all had the same, even though we think, okay, we'd like that to make it easier, that makes no sense. So it absolutely makes sense that all of us have just a few different core, our core values are different, because that's how we make up the whole world. Otherwise,
we can't all surf the same wave with Nemo, right? Like
we can't.
It gets crowded.
No, we can't all be Dory. She has her own core values there. Like she's a Yeah, right? Or
Yeah.
Nemo, or the turtles, or
Right.
they all, okay, I'm going to totally do a core value little thing on Nemo now.
That'd be so fun. It'd be good for the kids though. Like if
It would be great for
you're working
kids.
with children,
Yeah.
they'd be like, oh, got it. Right.
They would get it right away. Adults, it would take us forever.
I love it. I love it. And sometimes it's so much easier to see other people's stuff than your own, right? I'm like, they're the one with the problem. I don't know the problem.
Yeah. It's just different.
We're just all different. And oh my goodness. I could talk about this with you for all day, but I'm very aware you've been so generous with your time, and I really appreciate all of this. And I'm sure there's a few people asking themselves some interesting questions right now, like, do I have ADHD? and what the heck are my core values?
Yeah, what the heck are my core values? I don't know my core values. Can I get in the flow? Like, calm.
It's okay. It's okay. Right? We'll get there. And and it's funny because we all come from these different schools, and I've looked at this work a few times, and but yeah, I'd never thought of values and flow in the same sentence. So I massively appreciate this, and thank you so much. What is the best place for people to find you? We'll have all of your links just underneath.
Probably the easiest way, I'm just going to send people to my website, because if they want to take an assessment about ADHD, they'll go there. If they want to find out a little bit more about something else and core values, it's there. So if you want to follow up with any of this, just go to my website's coachingforadhd.com.
Right.
So coachingforadhd.com, very simple. You can connect with me there. You can download some of the ebooks and things. And I think I have a special gift for you though, don't I?
You may very well. I do not have it in my hot sheet.
Right. Well, we won't. That's okay.
But if you do, please share, and we will definitely get the link below. What is that?
Yeah. It's actually a copy of the Entrepreneurial Brain Style.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's so lovely.
For your listeners. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. We will.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's just not in my summary sheet that I get sent, but we'll definitely make sure that's hooked up below. So thank you so much. That'll be fascinating. I will be definitely checking that out. And I just thank you so much for being amazing and sharing all of your wisdom. And it's just been so interesting and just so lovely to speak to you. And
you too.
I really appreciate it. So thank you so much. And
well,
I'll hit the stop button.
All right.
Bye.